Hello, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be here and to have an opportunity to talk with you. Listening to the other speakers, I was reminded of the Mother's Day card I got from my 6-year-old granddaughter who's in kindergarten. She made 3 cards. She has 2 grandmothers, one for her other grandmother, one for me, and one for a great aunt. We all went to the celebration. And the cards were so special. The one for her other grandmother said, "I love you like the sun shines." The one for her great aunt said, "I love you like the flowers bloom." And the one for me said, "I love you like the lava goes to the sea." I said, "Oh my goodness, I don't know what that means, but I just love it. I just love it." And I asked her, "Mom, where did this come from?" She said, "Oh, they were studying poetry in school." And so obviously this was her attempt. But it's just so uplifting the way the children get it. They get it on every level. They completely understand the interrelationships. They understand love in its most magnificent way, that there is no end to the power of it and the reach of it and the regenerative nature of it. I want to talk about how lucky we are to be alive, to be adults, to be in tune, to be functioning right now, because this is the most amazing moment I have seen, that everything is on the table and causing us to have to think hard about things that we often pay very little attention to. We've had to think hard in recent years about the internet, which we took for granted. When we thought social media was just another way to be able to stay in touch with each other. But events that unfolded as a result of social media caused us to have to think hard about it. Do we really want it? If we want it, how do we control it? What are the protocols? Do we need governance? We have had to think hard about democracy, something that we just thought was there. We didn't think that it could be given up, didn't think that it could be seriously threatened, didn't know how fragile it actually was, but we're having to face that. We've had to reflect on institutions that have always been around, and we thought they always would be around. We thought that they functioned the way that they functioned because they had to. We didn't realize how much of the functioning of our institutions was because of custom, because of respect, because of habit. We had no idea. We've had to think about all of these things, and we're at a moment where history will look back, the future will look back, our ancestors will look back and will say, either that's when they absolutely started on the road to getting it right, or that was the beginning of it all being lost. You are living through that moment, and we are not without agency. We are not without agency. How has this come about at this time? Well, the past 2 years actually had so much to do with it. The pandemic, oh my goodness, I'm so happy to be out and about again, I must say. But the pandemic actually just laid bare what so many advocates have been talking about for so long, in terms of the health of the nation was vulnerable because we were not investing in the health of all. It laid bare that what people had been saying about the baked-in nature of racism had just permeated throughout every institution, whether they were work institutions or educational institutions or safety institutions, whatever they might be, racism had been deeply embedded. George Floyd's murder caused us to have to face that. And part of the reason we faced it is because we all saw it. It was the first time in decades that we had had a moment like when the sit-ins were happening and everybody saw the SNCC and other young people being brutalized by the police, by dogs, by hoses, because we only had 3 channels. The same thing was on all the channels because we were all home and we were glued to our TV. We saw the murder of George Floyd over and over and over again. And whatever prejudice or bias or ignorance we were taking into viewing it, it was clear what we were seeing, and there was no getting away from it. It also was the time in which we saw that for many people, racial superiority is more important than democracy. And that was a tough one. That was a tough one. But when we saw what happened on January 6th, there was no question that people were willing to sacrifice belief in a political voting system that really came to the conclusion if a multiracial majority was putting someone into the White House, that was illegitimate in and of itself. Didn't matter whether you could find evidence of voter fraud. The result that a multiracial democracy is joined together to create a result was rejected. Racial superiority is more important than democracy. So here we are with all of these things causing us to think, to study, to talk to our friends and neighbors and strangers about things that we never talked about before. And what we can do if we get it right is absolutely extraordinary. Because we really cannot create a thriving multiracial democracy if we don't understand it, if we don't know its history. We really cannot create a thriving multiracial democracy if we don't see the extraordinary asset that our difference is. It is so essential that we lay out a marker for where it is that we want to get to, and we develop a plan for how we're going to get there. This is our moment. I've been listening to the program, and I've gone back and looked at other programs, and when I say our moment, that it is very much something that we collectively are involved in. And what has been so inspiring is to see how many people all across the world are coming to the same conclusions. This is our moment to be able to lean into our agency, lean into our power, and make sure that we turn this moment into a roadmap for how to have a sustainable, thriving, multiracial democracy on a planet that we respect and we're living with as one within a context of humanity respecting all of humanity. But what is it going to take for us to get there? I think it's going to really require us to be able to take our beautiful and exciting multiracial coalition and realize that starting in this country, that coalition is the natural heir of the framers of the nation. When they sat down to form a more perfect union, to be able to do something that actually it's taken me a little time to come to. And let me confess that. Because I will tell you, as a black person growing up in this country, and I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, I was not feeling it. I was not feeling it. Like, what is the big deal about these founders? You know, and then as I learned more about them and started reading their biographies and hearing history told in more honest ways. But I will tell you, as I have studied democracy, and as I have studied those founding documents, it is clear to me that the framers punched way above their moral weight. They punched way above their moral weight. And once you realize that, you can accept extraordinary ideas, even if they come from people who are deeply flawed. And so as I think about the opportunity that we have now, it is just so clear that what we're going to have to do is own that we're the heirs to something that's very special. And the work is really hard because now we really can create a democracy that works for all. But it's going to require that we do three things to create a story that captures the imagination of people all around the nation and all around the world. And that story is going to have to be imbued with a real sense of history and understanding what got started historically that still is with us to this day. It is going to require that once we understand that history, that we begin to work on a big strategy that encompasses everything, and that when we pursue it, understanding that it is the moral thing to do, we understand that it is not a zero-sum game. Equity, inclusion is not a zero-sum game. And then the last thing that we're going to have to do is engage in transformative solidarity. So let me take each of them. The first, we've got to understand the history. We've got to understand the history. The United States of America is a nation that was founded on genocide for the purpose of stealing land and human bondage for the purpose of slave labor. This theft of land and theft of labor is the basis upon which the country was built. And in order to be able to justify that, there was developed a hierarchy of human value. And that hierarchy of human value not just justified, but it then got baked into every institution. That when you think about how it functioned, one of the things that is just starkly true when you think about it is that the dehumanizing relationship that formed the black-white paradigm during slavery, that dehumanized the slave and dehumanized the owner, created a paradigm that actually defined the way that oppression and repression would take place. And that black-white paradigm was defining, it was embedded, it is continuing, it is also inadequate to be able to fully understand the status of everybody who is oppressed. But everybody who is oppressed within the context of that paradigm. So we have to go back and study that history and understand that history. We can't go forward without it. We can't go forward without it. It's essential. I know it is uncomfortable. I know it is hard to talk about race. I know that just by lifting up the black-white paradigm, it raises a million questions. What about what happened with indigenous people and continues to happen? What about what happens to people who are Latinx and Asian? What about what happens to people with disabilities, who are transgender, people who are white and poor, all of the people who you can think of oppressed? How can I ignore that and lift up the black-white paradigm? Because the protocols of oppression were developed in that unnatural relationship. And we've got to face it. We've got to understand it. We have to analyze it. We have to see how it goes forward. Just take this example. Take a white woman who is low income, who moves into Detroit, and she has a couple of children. She enters a system seeking support that has been developed on the imagery of a black woman with a bunch of children who is irresponsible. That image is what creates our systems. It creates our systems of welfare, creates our systems of health, and all those systems. That white woman and her family are subjected to the impact of the black-white paradigm, even though she is a white woman. Just think about that. But the next thing we have to do is that we have to understand that addressing these wrongs, while it is the right thing to do, it is the moral thing to do, it is the only way to be able to go forward. That if we don't develop a way to be able to tap into the assets that are the people who make up the country, who make up the country and the world will not flourish. They will not survive. They will not tap the resources that are needed. Just think about the changing demographics within the United States. We all know that by 2044 or so, the majority of people in the country will be people of color. And you probably know that since 2012, the majority of all babies born in the country have been of color. You know that the majority of all kids in elementary school, our public schools, are of color. By 2030, the majority of the young workers will be of color. If we don't figure out how to invest in the people who are the future, we will not be investing in the nation. The fate of the nation is dependent on the very people who have been left behind. John talked about the article, The Curb Cut Effect, and it makes that point. It makes that point that equity creates more, not less. It's just like you all have talked so much about love. Love creates more. The more you love, the more you have. The more you give, the more you get. The more you spread it, the more it exists. Equity is like that. Equity is like that. It's not a zero-sum game. You invest in the people who are going to be the future, and the economy does better. The democracy works better. Our neighborhoods are better. We're safer in the places that we live. Got to do that. But we get there by finally coming to grips with transactional solidarity not being enough. The transactional solidarity of you sign my petition, I'll show up for your march. You read my article and push it out through social media, and I promise to be able to push out when you're speaking at Bioneers. I mean, that kind of transactional solidarity is not enough. We need a solidarity that actually builds on what I have been just saying, that our future collectively is dependent on all of us being able to reach our full potential. That is the definition of equity, just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, thrive, and reach their full potential. What we really have to understand is that this kind of solidarity, which I call transformative solidarity, doesn't have you thinking that I'm going to be your ally, but is asking you to be mine. You understand? It's not that I'm going to help you, you're going to help me. We're going to do it together because my survival is dependent on it. That's how we've not been there regarding racism. That so often when we talk about racism, and I know that many people don't talk about it at all, but this is something else you might not know, but as a black person, there is very little other to talk about. Because everything that you're trying to do, you're rubbing up against it. I mean, I grew up in a household where from the time I could hear, I was hearing about black people and white people and racism. When I got to the point where I could actually participate in the conversation, I had to participate in conversations that were about that topic. Many black people are super comfortable talking about racism. Many white people are very uncomfortable. But when we talk about it, we get to the point where we understand that the problem with racism is not a problem for black people. It is a problem for the world. It is a problem for the nation. It's a problem for everybody. You are not solving my problem when you work on racism. You are solving your problem. Transformative solidarity is what we have to do in order to be able to be in total partnership, in total alignment with those whose survival, their ability to thrive, their ability to participate is totally dependent on us getting rid of the racisms and the other isms that hold us back. And so when we develop the story that is based on our history, when we make a commitment to achieving a world in which all can reach their full potential, equity, we understand that we do that because it is the right thing to do, but it is the only thing to do to be able to go forward. And the process of doing it is one in which we join with others. We embrace their realities. We understand that our difference is our strength. It is our very best asset that we have, that by embracing it, we then are in a different kind of coalition, not one that just is for the close in, but one is for the way out. This is our moment. Everything is on the table, and it's up to us to take advantage of it, to join together and to move forward, because we cannot unlock the promise of the nation. We cannot unlock the promise of our highest ideals until we unleash the promise in us all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.